This is Christopher John Bjerknes. It is May 25th, 2023. The iconography of St. George the Dragon Slayer has been very popular throughout the 20th and 21st century among Trotskyites, Russians in general, Georgians. And it is utilized to dupe Christians into believing that Marxist leaders are in fact Christian leaders who are battling against Satan, the Leviathan, to defeat evil. St. George the Dragon Slayer was used in the same way during the Crusades to draw Christians into battling against Muslims so that they could take over Palestine and hand it over to the Jews and restore Jews to Palestine as their homeland. At the same time, in the Crusades, there were many Jewish messiahs who appeared, David Elroy probably being the most prominent among them, or at least the best known because Disraeli wrote a book about him. But today, it's being utilized by Trotskyites, by Putinists, by Trumpists, by libertarians, especially by QAnon people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, everybody who wants you to believe that they are good Christians battling evil, and they want you to turn off your rational mind, to think religiously, and to listen to them as if they are spokesmen for and megaphones of the Christian gods. We can see here Trump being depicted as St. George the Dragon Slayer in the same way that Trotsky was. And you'll notice that this was coming out of Russia. And in exactly the same way, Putin, at exactly the same time, was being portrayed as St. George the Dragon Slayer, the good Christian leader slaughtering the Leviathan of Satan, riding upon a gallant white horse. And I'm going to explain to you the occult meaning of all these symbols that Christians aren't actually aware of, that Marxists are employing in order to subvert Christianity and use it as a weapon against itself. So again, you can see these images of Trump as the Christian knight slaughtering the Leviathan. What the Christians who make these images don't realize is that to occultists, all of this represents Christendom as the Leviathan. And this is, to them, the crypto-Jewish leader slaughtering the Leviathan of Christendom and replacing it with communism. To the Marxists, this exact same imagery represents the complete subversion of Christianity and handing it over to the enemies of Christianity. So let's look at what all these symbols mean and where they came from. You can see Trotsky employing a spear to slay the counter-revolution of the Leviathan. Trotsky is riding a white horse. It is depicted as the triumph of night, night symbolizing the moon, and we see pentagrams all over the place. There's a pentagram pointing up by Trotsky's head like a crown, and his shield is canted to make it appear that the other pentagram is actually pointing up when in fact it's pointing down. So we have as above, so below, like the Star of David. And this pentagram pointed down represents Satan, Samael, and Lilith, as I'll explain later. This pentagram pointed up represents Adam and Eve as the children of Satan. Trotsky's cape is red to signify the Egyptian god Seth, who is the god of the evil desert redlands. Seth had red hair. Red represents blood, it represents darkness, it represents chaos, and it represents the soul. This is an ancient Egyptian depiction representing the sovereign power of Pharaoh as Horus, the hawk. Note that Horus the hawk's feathers are ruffled, and this is symbolized by Trotsky's crown and by his outstretched cape. The reason, according to the Egyptians, that the hawk's feathers are ruffled is because when hawks would drink from the river Nile, they would ruffle their feathers so that crocodiles could not swallow them, because the feathers would stick in the crocodile's throat, and the crocodile would have to spit them out or die. The horse to the ancient Egyptians represented the river horse, the hippopotamus of Set. And hippopotamus in Greek literally translates as river horse. So this horse is actually not a horse, it's a hippopotamus. And you can see that the hippopotamus is bound. It is tied up, it is chained, and it is being controlled by Horus. Hippopotamus is one of the animal aspects of the evil god Seth, who represents chaos and disorder. The crocodile is another of the animal aspects of Seth. And in this image, the crocodile represents rebels and invading forces. The red lands were the desert lands of foreigners who would invade Egypt. And they would invade Egypt in two ways. One way was as a naval power, which would be the Leviathan, the sea power. The other way was as armies on land, which would be the behemoth, the river horse, the hippopotamus, who would cross over the deserts and attack. The others would attack by sea. So Seth represents a foreign invasion to the Egyptians, and Seth represents anarchy and rebellion against the Pharaoh and against his brother Horus. Horus and Seth fought each other under the direction of their mother Isis, in the same way that Judaism, which is a syncretic religion, worships Seth and adopts the idea that Seth and Horus represent Esau and Jacob, who fought each other even in the very womb of their mother Rebekah, and Rebekah controls that battle between them. To the Egyptians, this was an image of the triumph of the sovereignty of the Pharaoh, who worshipped Horus, who is the god of light and order, and the order of a sovereign state over the Sethian forces of chaos, darkness, and rebellion, and of foreign invasion. Horus was the god of the fertile black soil of the Nile, and those were known as the Black Lands, and the Black Lands were considered good. The Red Lands were the mansion of Satan, the deserts of Seth, and Seth had red hair, which is why the communists and the Muslims have adopted the color red to represent the fact that they worship Seth and not Horus. So to the Egyptians, this image, which became St. George the Dragon Slayer, represented the sovereign Horus, the Pharaoh, triumphing over the Sethian rebels and the foreign armies and navies of Seth. And the way that Horus did that was by chaining up Seth and utilizing his own powers against him. The Christians and later the communists, and I'll particularly address the communists because that's what we face today, have flipped everything on its head. Just as Jacob usurped the birthright and blessings of his brother Esau, Seth usurps in communism, Christianity, and Islam the power of the Pharaoh, of the sovereign state, of the Egyptian god Horus, and of the Egyptian people. So everything that the Egyptians believed is completely inverted. Horus now becomes Seth, and Seth is riding the Judaized religion of Islam and the Judaized religion of Marxism, which slaughters all of the good gods of the Gentiles and replaces them with the evil gods, the Judaizing gods of Seth. So the hippopotamus, the river horse, has become Marxism and Islam. And the Leviathan, the sea power that conquered Egypt, is Christianity. So Trotsky is pretending to be a Christian leader, but in fact, he is riding the behemoth of the Eurasianist Marxists and Islamicists to slaughter the counter-revolutionary Leviathan of Christendom. So Seth has replaced the ancestral gods of the Gentiles with Sethian gods, representing the hippopotamus, the behemoth, and the Leviathan of Christianity, Islam, and Marxism. So everything has been turned on its head through the use of chaos magic. So these Marxist leaders present themselves as if they are good Christians and they are fighting against Satan. But Christianity itself is the Leviathan, the power of Seth, of Satan. And they ride upon the behemoth of Marxism and Islam, which is in fact also the Judaization of Gentiles, so that they are also serving Seth as Seth's slaves to kill one another. Remember that Trotsky had that crown of the pentagram pointing upwards to represent Adam and Eve, which symbolizes the Gentiles as the children of Samael and Lilith. Let me get out of the way. Who are the pentagram pointed downwards. This pentagram is represented with the letters Lameth Vav Yod Tav Nun, which spell out Leviathan. And the pentagram above, and all of this came from the Christian Kabbalists, represents Yod He Shin Vav He, adding the female element to the name of God, Yod He Vav He, which is the sound of a donkey braying. And the Christian Kabbalists adopted the pentagram, which is the fifth Sephirah on the Sephirotic tree of life, which represents justice. It's on the pillar of severity, and it imposes justice and punishment on the Gentiles. And that's done by giving Samael a scapegoat on Yom Kippur and festivals of the moon, so that Samael becomes confused by the blasting of the shofar, which blasts out the sound of a donkey, and transfers all the sins of Israel onto his children, the Gentiles, who are considered to be evil chaos. The Jews obtain mercy on the tree of life, on the pillar of mercy, in chesed, which represents mercy, because the Lord shows them mercy by being confused by this transfer of their sins to the Gentiles through the gift of a scapegoat. This is the Egyptian god Seth. He has the head of a donkey, which appears as Moses riding the donkey, Jesus riding the donkey, Balaam with the talking donkey, Samson slaying the Gentiles with the head of an ass. It's all over the Old Testament. And this is utilized in Egyptian iconography as this chained up hippopotamus. You can see that the hippo is chained, it is bound, and it is being ridden by Horus carrying a spear, and these two powers are being directed by their mother Isis. In Judaism, it becomes Esau and Jacob being directed by their mother Rebekah. Going back to that image of the sovereign power, the Pharaoh, defeating the anarchists and foreign invaders and rebels by riding Seth, the bound behemoth. That becomes in Christianity the hawk with the ruffled feathers and the cape, slaughtering the Leviathan, riding the behemoth. The behemoth is the chained river horse, the hippopotamus. And this was utilized in the Crusades to get the behemoth and Leviathan to fight one another, Christians and Muslims to fight one another, so that Jewry could conquer the land of Palestine. It's utilized in Marxism to have figures like Trotsky, like Trump, like Putin, like Xi Jinping, like Kim Jong-un, get the Christians and the Muslims to fight one another, to get the Marxists and the capitalists, the revolutionaries and the counter-revolutionaries to slaughter one another, so that ultimately the messianic aspirations of the Israelites become fulfilled, and they have the international communist government as their global government ruled from Zion that fulfills both the communist aspirations and the Zionistic aspirations to have a world government ruled from Zion. Alexander Dugin is a Kabbalist, and he brought all of this Kabbalistic chaos magic to bear in the struggle between the behemoth of the Eurasianist Marxists and the Leviathan of the Christian sea powers of Great Britain and America, which he, like Lenin, refers to as the Atlanticists, so that the Eurasianist behemoth and the Atlanticist Leviathan consume one another. And this has drawn in the Muslims as the behemoth, as was always the plan, versus the Western Christians, as was always the plan. And Western refers to Egypt as opposed to the Asiatic Easterners, who were these foreigners, who were Jewry, who invaded Egypt as the Hyksos and invaded Egypt as the West. And that is why they utilize the image of West to connote the fact that West represents Egypt, East represents the Asiatic behemoth that comes as a land power to invade Western Europe, to invade Egypt, and to conquer it, and to slaughter the sea power of Great Britain and America, which would be the navies invading Egypt and slaughtering Egypt. So this is all extremely occult. It's very esoteric. I'm the only person in the world who is explaining it to those not in the know. But this is what underlies Duginism, and it is why Duginism appears among libertarians, among QAnon people, Marxists, Trotskyites, neo-Nazis, and white nationalists, among others. Plutarch discussed these Egyptian practices, which have been adopted by the Christians, the Muslims, and the Marxists as a means of subverting Gentile peoples. And it's very important to emphasize the fact that Judaism has created Christianity in order to dupe Gentiles into abandoning their ancestral gods in favor of worshiping Seth as their god. Jesus Christ was early depicted with the head of an ass, and the god Yahweh is written in Greek to spell the sound that an ass makes when it's brayed, iota, alpha, omega. So Plutarch wrote, for which reason they give him being Seth, who is called by the Greeks Typhon. Seth, the red-haired god of evil, darkness, and chaos, is the god Typhon. For which reason they give him for attribute the most stupid of all tame animals, namely the ass. The ass has become Christianity. It also represents Islam because Islam signifies Ishmael, who was the wild ass who would be pitted against all of humanity as a warrior force. That is the behemoth, that warrior force. The behemoth works for Seth. It is one of his animal aspects, the hippopotamus. The Leviathan also works for Seth. It is his crocodile aspect. His navy and his army is the hippopotamus, and he becomes the religion of the Gentiles in the form of the ass in order to subvert them through the Judaization of their religions of Christianity, Islam, and Marxism. Let me start again. For which reason they give him for attribute the most stupid of all tame animals, namely the ass, and of the wild the most savage, namely the crocodile, the Leviathan, and the hippopotamus, the behemoth, the river horse. With respect to the ass, we have already explained the meaning, but at Hermopolis, they show as a figure of Typhon a hippopotamus, upon which stands a hawk fighting with a serpent, by the hippopotamus signifying Typhon, by the hawk power and virtue or sovereignty, which Typhon frequently gains by force and never ceases to be disturbed by his own wickedness. Let's take a look again at the Egyptian representation of that. We have the hawk standing on the hippopotamus, battling the serpent below. The hawk standing atop the behemoth, the river horse, battling the serpent below. The hawk riding the river horse, the behemoth, battling the serpent below. But this is an inversion of this. This is the hawk representing the sovereign, representing the power of Pharaoh, riding the bound behemoth of his brother Seth to battle the foreign invaders and the revolutionaries. But here we have the revolutionaries leading the fight and duping the Eurasianist behemoths or the Christian crusaders to battle against the Leviathan, seafaring powers, the navy, to mutually consume one another so that ultimately Seth wins. And Seth has already won by duping the Eurasianist behemoth into becoming Marxists and Muslims and duping the seafaring powers of Rome, Greece, Great Britain, Western Europe, and America into becoming Christians and worshiping the ass of Seth. And again, the river horse is the hippopotamus. The Leviathan is the crocodile aspects, the animal aspects of Seth. So the figure of Typhon, a hippopotamus, upon which stands a hawk fighting with a serpent, by the hippopotamus signifying Typhon or Seth, by the hawk power and virtue or sovereignty, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, which Typhon, the behemoth, frequently gains by force through rebellion. That rebellion being either foreign invaders of the crocodile or anarchists, Marxists, and revolutionaries. Remember, the early Christians were revolutionaries. Islam was a revolutionary against the religion of the Arabs. Okay, never ceases to be disturbed by his own wickedness and to disturb others, for which cause they sacrifice on the 7th of the month of Cybe, which they call the coming of Isis out of Phoenicia. The Hyksos appeared from Canaan and from Phoenicia to overwhelm the Egyptians. They stamp upon the consecrated cakes the figure of a hippopotamus bound, that is the river horse, which is tied up and chained to serve the hawk of Horus. But in Marxism, the hawk of Horus has been subverted by the communists, who become the power and virtue and the sovereign, just as Trotsky replaced the Tsar as sovereign of Russia. They stamp upon the consecrated cakes the figure of a hippopotamus bound. In the city of Apollinopolis, it is the custom that everyone must by all means eat a bit of crocodile once a year. In Judaism, that became the ritual of eating Haman's ears on the festival of Purim once a year. And on one day, they catch and kill as many crocodiles as they can and lay them out in front of the temple, saying that Typhon ran away from Horus, changing himself into a crocodile, thus making out all animals, plants, and feelings that are noxious and bad to be the productive parts and instigations of Typhon. The Christians slaughtered pagans, the Muslims slaughtered pagans, and Trotsky slaughtered tens of millions of counter-revolutionaries and Russian Gentiles. So the cape comes in here. The bird is also said, when corpses are lying about unburied, to hover over them and drop earth upon their eyes. And when, in order to drink, it descends upon the river, it sets its wings upright, and having drank, bends them back up again, by which it is evident that it protects itself and escapes from the crocodile. For should it be swallowed up, the wing remains as it stood, fixed upright. And we see that in the figure of the cape and of the ruffled feathers on the crown of the warrior who has replaced Horus as sovereign through revolution and foreign invasion. We can see that in Trotsky's red cape, the red of Seth, the red of the red lands, the red of the evil wilderness. This nighttime sky represents the skin of Satan, which bears speckles. In the Talmud, it states that in the end times they will eat Satan, the Leviathan, and they will utilize his skin to light up Jerusalem brighter than daylight. So here again we see Trotsky as St. George the Dragon Slayer, with the theme of the outstretched wings so that the crocodile cannot consume him, so that the counter-revolution cannot succeed, but instead the subverted power of the sovereignty of the Gentiles is utilized to slaughter the Gentiles themselves. And the Gentiles are pitted against one another as the Eurasian behemoth, the river horse, which represents the Marxists and the Muslims, battling against the Christian Leviathan. And under Stalin, they took over the Russian Orthodox Church and represent it as if it's a Christian power, when in fact it's a Eurasianist power being utilized to battle the Christian West and destroy it, so that Christians are destroying each other just as Muslims and Marxists are destroying Christians. The coat of arms of the Russian Federation has the same thing, the twin-headed eagle representing the power of the religious and the profane, and St. George, the Dragon Slayer, slaughtering the counter-revolution. They pretend to be Christian in order to subvert, attack, and destroy Christians. Here's another of the same images of Trotsky with the shield canted so that the pentagram points down, the pentagram on top points up, representing as above, so below, as Seth rules evil and darkness and chaos in the sky and on the moon. He will rule it on the earth by getting the Gentiles to fight one another and destroy one another in the form of the Behemoth and the Leviathan, the Eurasianists, Marxists, and Muslims battling the Western Christians as the sea power, the Navy battling the army to mutually consume one another, to invade Egypt, replace the Pharaoh, and then execute all of the Egyptians through revolution, permanent revolution, and permanent war, which were two maxims that Trotsky took on from Parvis, Alexander Gelfand, and from Karl Marx and from Lenin, was the idea that he is the god Seth, who represents permanent revolution and permanent war, darkness and chaos, and inflicting it on the West, on the Egyptians, on the Gentiles. The Rastafarians also employed this imagery, and they united it correctly with the Star of David, which surrounds it. It is people pretending to be Christians who in fact represent the power of Seth with the red cape, destroying the Gentiles by pitting them against one another, the Behemoth fighting the Leviathan. I'm going to be explaining a lot more about this imagery, where it comes from. I think my next video is going to be on Jewish moon worship and how it relates to Marxism and Islam as well as Christianity. Please like, share, and subscribe so that you don't miss that. I want to take this closing opportunity to thank those of you who contributed. You enabled me to make this video, and I'm going to be working on my next video immediately after this one, if my voice holds out. And thank you very much. If you guys want to keep me going and help me to work on my books and make these videos, please contribute. There will be, in the description below, there will be links where you can contribute with cryptocurrencies through Bitcoin and Ethereum, and also through PayPal. You can visit my website, cjbbooks.com. Below each book title, there is also a set of donation links. Thank you so much for donating. I am barely scraping by. I'm in deep trouble. I need your contributions. Please help. And I'm going to keep cranking out these videos and fighting the good fight, unlike Trotsky. I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I'm trying to benefit all of humanity and rescue Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Marxists from the fate that their leaders are trying to impose on all of us, which is our extermination. Thank you again, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.